In 2004, the very first episode of Snapped featured the story of Celeste Beard, a beautiful cocktail waitress who won the heart of a Texas millionaire.
He was a lonely man, and he wanted a companion to travel with.
They went on cruises, they went to Europe. He replaced all of her clothes. Celeste had everything she wanted.
Until a mysterious late-night injury put her mogul husband's life on the line.
She's screaming, telling him to please save his life.
I felt just uncertainty, was he gonna make it?
When that apparent medical emergency turned out to be attempted murder, the dark side of this May-December romance was revealed.
It had love triangle, it had money, it had sex, and it had murder.
It became very apparent there were two sides of this woman.
It makes me sick to my stomach and sad for the pain and suffering that he went through. It's pretty obvious that Celeste is evil.
Back in 2004, Celeste sat down with our cameras to proclaim her innocence.
I'm not guilty, but they're going to read it as guilty. I will never apologize for Stephen's murder when I had nothing to do with it.
Now she's back to plead her case once more and reveal shocking new details of her past.
Our house was a complete war zone. I told Stephen that I had had an affair. All the lies started coming out about everything that I had been doing.
When she realized that she could not just completely manipulate this man, she set on a different path, and that was, how do I get rid of him?
I still, to this day, don't understand how they can continue with the lies. There's a night that I don't ask God not to wake me up in the morning because I've been here 19 years. I'm Celeste Beard Johnson. Anytime I'm offered an opportunity to proclaim my innocence, I take it to hopefully get the public to turn their mind not against me, but maybe for my cause of my innocence. I've been rotting in here for something that I didn't do.
I would expect nothing less than for her to continue to claim that she was somehow framed. But, she's the puppeteer behind the puppet show. If you don't believe she's a liar, then believe she's delusional.
This crime happened in a high upscale neighborhood in Austin, inside a beautiful, huge mansion.
Around 3 a.m. on October 2nd, 1999, a 911 call came in from 74-year-old Stephen Beard.
Hello?
Hello?
Do you need an ambulance?
I need an ambulance. Hurry. My guts just came out of my stomach.
He'd been asleep, and he wakes up, and there is literally a hole in his stomach. He had recently had some medical procedures, so he thought something had gone wrong medically with him.
Emergency responders raced to the Beard mansion and found Stephen alone in his bedroom.
Mr. Beard was holding his hand over his stomach, and you could see intestines protruding up between his fingers.
Before cops could figure out what had happened, Stephen's wife, Celeste Beard, suddenly burst into the bedroom, awakened by the commotion.
I was crying. I just kept saying, please don't let him die. That's all I could think about. I never slept in the room. His CPAP machine was loud, and I could not sleep in there.
Paramedics strapped Stephen into a gurney and wheeled him out to an awaiting ambulance, his sobbing wife following close behind.
Celeste is screaming, telling him to please save his life. She doesn't want him to die.
I didn't know anything that was going on, and I just lost it.
She was very emotionally upset, but she's always been a caring kind of a person.
Born in 1963 in Camarillo, California, Celeste Beard's childhood was hardly ideal. Abused by a male relative, Celeste was eager to run away as soon as she could.
My home life was very dysfunctional. I wanted to get out of the house so bad.
As a teenager, she was unhappy, and I didn't know the reason why. She was getting to be more independent and feisty. She was troubled at that time.
Before she graduated high school, Celeste moved in with her teenage boyfriend, Craig Bratcher, and became pregnant with twins.
I think I was about 15 years old when I started dating him. I was pregnant when I turned 17.
In 1980, the young couple married, and soon after, Celeste gave birth to twin daughters, Jennifer and Christina. But it wasn't long before Celeste found out that she hadn't run all that far from her abusive past.
Her husband was into drugs and drinking and became abusive.
In 1983, Celeste grabbed her girls and ran away again. Over the next several years, she would head east, leaving a trail of broken marriages in her wake.
She put her stuff in a U-Haul and drove with the twins. She was away in Washington for several years, and I guess they lived in Arizona sometimes also.
By the end of her third marriage in 1993, Celeste found herself starting over again, this time in Texas.
Celeste started waitressing at the Austin Country Club.
Austin Country Club's the oldest country club in Texas. Just affluent people were members.
It was there 30-year-old Celeste caught the eye of a handsome older man, 68-year-old millionaire media tycoon Stephen Beard.
Stephen Beard was a self-made financial wizard. He founded a television station. When he sold KBVO, the rumor around was that he got $15 million for it.
Stephen had recently lost his wife of 42 years to terminal brain cancer.
He was a lonely man, and he wanted a companion to travel with.
Less than 2 weeks after she died, Stephen had asked me to go out with him, and I did. We dated probably for about a month before he wanted me and the girls to move in with him.
I liked him. He was a very strong person, and so the age didn't bother me in the least. It seemed very appropriate. It seemed to be very good for Celeste.
Celeste was swept off her feet by the millionaire widower.
He always lavished me with gifts.
He had a gorgeous mansion and every kind of conveniences that could convey. And when they traveled, they always went first class and everything.
They went on cruises. They went to Europe. He replaced all of her clothes. Celeste had everything she wanted in life from Steve.
On February 18th, 1995, Celeste and Stephen married. At Celeste's prodding, Stephen also adopted her now teenaged twin daughters.
I forced him to adopt them a month and a half before they turned 18. He was very loving and giving towards them in the beginning.
Steve coming into the picture was appreciated, to have a father figure. And I thought of it as my life can be normal.
Not long after the fairy tale wedding, Celeste set to work spending Stephen's money.
She went on a spending spree, nothing to go out and spend $15,000, $30,000 a day.
Celeste would buy a new Cadillac the way I would buy a Reese's peanut butter cup on the way out of the supermarket.
He could have stopped my spending. He could have taken away my credit cards, but he didn't. I think the biggest purchase I spent in a month was maybe $125,000. But most of the stuff I bought was for the homes and for my daughters.
Only 4 years later, the dream life that Celeste and Stephen had been building together stood on the edge of disaster. Following his dramatic 911 call, Stephen was being rushed to the emergency room with a mysterious injury to his stomach, which he assumed was a complication from a recent surgery.
The fact that he was able to make that phone call is amazing because the way he describes what was happening to him, he was dying.
Coming up, as doctors race to save the millionaire's life, sheriff's deputies will discover they're dealing with more than just a medical procedure gone wrong.
They have a shotgun shell casing on the floor.
That's when the investigation, changed 180 degrees.
I just remember feeling really sick. It was pretty much living your worst nightmare.
On October 2nd, 1999, 74-year-old millionaire Stephen Beard was fighting for his life in an Austin, Texas emergency room after waking up in the middle of the night with a gruesome wound in his abdomen.
He had had a recent surgical procedure, and he thought it was a result of that. So it really came in as a medical call.
As the doctors worked, Stephen's frantic wife, 36-year-old Celeste Beard, stayed nearby.
She goes to the hospital with him and is by his side, and this has got to be a very scary moment for her.
My only concern was that they'd keep Stephen from dying. I mean, that's all I cared about.
Meanwhile, investigators inside the Beard home were making a key discovery.
After Mr. Beard had been evacuated from the home, the bedding was moved, and we found that 20-gauge shotgun shell.
When a deputy came out from the room and informed me that a shotgun shell had been located in the bedroom, the investigation changed 180 degrees.
The shell casing wasn't the only troubling discovery investigators made.
The sliding glass door that led to Stephen's bedroom was unlocked, and the alarm system, which you could set by zones of the house, was not on.
This was a very safe, a very prestigious neighborhood where you kind of can leave your doors open. But at the same time, inside this mansion, there is a lot of stuff that people would like to get their hands on.
Investigators wondered if someone had broken into the home in search of valuables and shot Stephen Beard in the process. But they soon realized that theory was unlikely.
Celeste had tons of jewelry, and she had beautiful, expensive, rare paintings, and none of that was touched.
It appears that Stephen Beard is the target. So then the question you immediately wonder is, who would have a reason to do this?
As investigators continued to ponder that question, Stephen successfully made it through surgery. It was a positive step, but he wasn't out of danger just yet.
Stephen had only a slim chance of, he was like a 10% chance of surviving.
I just remember feeling really sick. All these emotions, just uncertainty, was he gonna make it? It was pretty much living your worst nightmare.
With the family still reeling, detectives arrived at the hospital, hoping Celeste could help them figure out what happened that night. But they were out of luck. Celeste said that because she was sleeping in another wing of the mansion, she didn't see or hear the assailant.
The only time I slept in the master bedroom was to take a nap during the day.
Didn't seem extremely odd that she wasn't sleeping in the same bed with him because of medical issues. What did seem odd was not to have heard the shotgun go off. That seemed strange.
To her, it was very much a surprise. Why would anybody want to hurt Steve? He's such a wonderful person.
Detectives wanted to speak to Stephen Beard himself, but it was soon clear that would be easier said than done.
Celeste refused to allow the police to talk to her husband. She went and hired a criminal defense attorney the same day that the police were beginning their investigation.
The whole thing was kind of suspicious.
To this day, Celeste denies this account of what happened.
That wasn't my decision. They've been blaming it on me ever since, but Stephen was not in a position to talk. The notice on the door was to go through the attorney. He didn't want to talk to them.
With Stephen off limits, investigators turned to Celeste's twin daughters, and what they said was eye-opening.
Celeste's daughter had a suggestion about, I think maybe you should look into this person. Her name is Tracy Tarleton. And I think she may have something to do with my father's shooting.
She was Celeste's friend, and they hung out quite a bit. They met at a mental hospital.
Celeste was going through some severe depression at the time. So her family admitted her into that mental hospital.
Celeste's daughters explained that their mother's relationship with Stephen had become rocky in recent months. So rocky that Celeste had threatened suicide.
Our house was a complete war zone. Stephen wanted me to have nothing more to do with the twins as far as disciplining them. I was feeling like I was going to be totally alone in this big house because he passed out every night. It was just too much, and I was so upset about everything. I was so depressed. I just wanted to kill myself at that point.
She is so distraught that in front of one of her daughters, she picks up a firearm, holds it against her head, and threatens suicide. The police are called, and thankfully the situation was resolved safely, but she is hospitalized at a psychiatric facility for her own safety.
It was at that facility where Celeste met Tracy Tarleton.
Tracy Tarleton, at the time she met Celeste Beard, was having some mental issues. She was suicidal and she had an alcohol problem.
The two women shared an immediate and intense bond.
I felt a kinship with her. I could talk to her and not feel bad or feel like somebody wouldn't understand what I was talking about.
We bonded over similar childhood traumas, and that's how Tracy and I became friends. She needed a friend, and I needed a friend.
By June of 1999, both women were discharged from the psychiatric hospital. Celeste fled back into the waiting arms of her family, but she stayed in close touch with her new best friend, Tracy.
They were still very close. They talked very often on the phone. Tracy spent quite a bit of time at the Beard home.
I actually gave a party for her at my lake house, and I think I only spent a few $1,000s. And, you know, I know a lot of people think that's a lot of money to spend on a friend, but it really wasn't if you took it in context with what I spent on my other friends.
But according to Celeste's daughters, it soon became evident that Tracy and their mother were more than just friends.
I mean, it was pretty obvious that she had feelings for Celeste.
Coming up, investigators uncover a passionate affair and a chilling plot.
One of the daughters said she saw Celeste and Tracy kissing, and that's when she knew something was up.
Celeste had convinced Tracy that if Celeste remained with Stephen Beard, Celeste would kill herself.
In October of 1999, Texas investigators were hunting for whomever shot media mogul millionaire Stephen Beard in his own home. Access to the victim had been cut off by his wife, Celeste Beard, so detectives were turning to her 18-year-old twin daughters for information.
The first introduction of Tracy Tarleton was actually through one of the girls, that my mother has this friend who seems to be over the top about her.
Celeste would be sitting on top of Tracy's lap and, snuggling her ear. Things that you don't normally see two friends doing.
But that's not all Celeste's daughter, Christina, witnessed.
Christina had told me that she walked in on them in bed and Tracy was kissing on her. And Celeste's interaction with Tracy was basically like, we're lovers,
At that point, their reaction is to go tell Steve because they feel like it's a betrayal of him.
Stephen was outraged, and he, from that point on, didn't want Tracy anywhere around his family.
Celeste, however, claims her daughters were lying about the whole ordeal.
They never saw that, and I never kissed her. There was no kissing or anything. I just wouldn't have done that.
The twins were adamant about their suspicion of Tracy.
I thought Tracy could be involved, so I had to say something. I just remember being very young and scared and really focusing on, justice for Stephen.
On October 2nd, 1999, detectives paid a visit to Tracy Tarleton's house to ask her about her relationship with Celeste. She swore they were just friends, but her home decor suggested otherwise.
We were able to observe, quite frankly, almost a shrine to Celeste.
They saw a lot of pictures of Celeste and candles lit next to these pictures.
Incredibly unusual, especially for just a simple friendship. Tracy having a shrine to Celeste, to me, really indicates a fixation with Celeste.
The detectives got right to the matter at hand.
They straight out ask her, did you have anything to do with the assault on Stephen? And she says, no.
They asked her, do you own a shotgun? And Tracy said, yes, I do. And Tracy willingly handed it over.
It was a 20-gauge shotgun, just like the one used to shoot Stephen.
At that point, they felt like they had a pretty strong suspect in the case.
When detectives left, they took Tracy's shotgun with them for ballistics testing. And when the results came back, it was just as they suspected.
Once they did the ballistics test, it was clear that Tracy's shotgun was the one that had fired the shell.
The next morning, police brought Tracy down to the station for an official interrogation. Faced with the ballistics evidence, Tracy finally admitted she had shot Stephen Beard. But when detectives asked her why, she refused to answer.
You knew that there was more to what she was saying than what she was saying. Something is eating at her. It's not allowing her to tell us what we need to know.
Police charged Tracy with felony injury while they continued investigating the case and Celeste.
Celeste, although she wanted to very much appear as this poor, distraught woman, she didn't seem to have much of an interest in solving the crime, which seemed very odd.
4 months later, on January 18th, 2000, Stephen Beard was released from Brackenridge Hospital and placed in the custody of his wife.
I mean, it was a miracle, right? You would think that he was not going to survive that gunshot, but he did.
He wanted me to take over his care, and I was willing to do that. I wanted to do whatever he wanted me to do because I felt so guilty for bringing Tracy into our lives.
As police were continuing to investigate her behind the scenes, Celeste was given explicit instructions by the hospital to routinely clean Stephen's wound to stave off infection. But just 1 day after returning home, his condition took a drastic turn.
Shortly after he's released to Celeste and she's able to take him home and to care for him, he's right back at the hospital, and this time he has an infection.
And things only got worse from there.
Within 3 days, he has developed such a severe infection that it's killed him.
I was really upset. It was shocking that he didn't make it.
When Stephen died, I was so overwhelmed with grief. It was horrible. I mean, I just went crazy. I literally went crazy.
Following Stephen's death, the charges against Tracy Tarleton were upgraded to murder. Still, she refused to tell police why she shot Stephen, or if Celeste had anything to do with it. But when investigators heard about the new widow's recent behavior, it raised more eyebrows.
Shortly after Stephen's death, Celeste calls Stephen's banker to immediately arrange for what her allowance is going to be now that Steve passed. It's very difficult to say how somebody would react in a time of trauma or in a time of grief. But I think it's really telling that we see a lack of compassion.
Also, what didn't make sense was that Celeste, now that her husband was dead, was, kind of back to her high spending ways, partying, spending money, running around different places.
The way she acted wouldn't be a way a widow would act that loved their spouse. I just remember her laughing a lot, kind of in a way that she was relieved that he wasn't around anymore.
Friends had said that Celeste told them that Stephen just didn't satisfy her sexually, and she was having an affair with her ex-husband. She called him BMW, and she told her friends that stood for Big Mexican Wiener.
However, Celeste claims the affair was short-lived and that Stephen knew about her infidelity.
All the lies and everything started coming out about everything that I had been doing. So I told him in September. I told him I was deeply regretful and would he forgive me? And he said yes. He planned us to start our life over. Stephen planned a $60,000 limo ride from Frankfurt, Germany, all the way to London. We were going to reaffirm our marriage vows.
As scandalous as her recent behavior appeared, police didn't have any concrete evidence showing Celeste had a hand in her husband's murder. Until a shocking call came in 6 months later.
Tracy calls up the detective and tells them, I'm going to tell you why I shot Stephen Beard.
Coming up, Celeste's alleged lover holds nothing back.
Celeste moving on with her life was just the final straw for her.
And what she says will blow the case wide open.
In Celeste's mind, she was definitely going to benefit more by his death than by a divorce.
Six months after 75-year-old Stephen Beard died from an infected gunshot wound, his widow's alleged lover, Tracy Tarleton, made a surprising call to Texas investigators from behind bars.
Tracy calls up the detective and tells them, I'm going to tell you why I shot Stephen Beard.
Tracy saw an article in the newspaper that Celeste had gotten married and gone on a honeymoon with her fifth husband.
Tracy Tarleton all of a sudden realizes, I have been so duped. And that's when she decided not only to clear her own name, but she suddenly starts to identify with Stephen Beard, feeling like he wasn't the only victim here.
When detectives sat down with Tracy, she admitted that she and Celeste were more than just friends.
Tracy was very adamant that they did have a relationship.
Tracy believed that Celeste was someone who had a lesbian love for Tracy.
Tracy claimed that a few months before she had shot Stephen Beard, Celeste had come to her begging for help.
Celeste had convinced Tracy that if Celeste remained with Stephen Beard, Celeste would kill herself. That if she tried to leave Stephen Beard, then Stephen Beard would harm Celeste.
According to Tracy, Celeste told her that Stephen was an abusive monster.
Celeste tried to paint Stephen Beard as being cruel to her, that he demanded, sexual favors.
He was very emotionally and verbally abusive to all of us. I just overlooked it because I felt like I deserved it. I tried to keep the kids away from it, but it was difficult.
We spoke with a lot of people who knew them, and there was no indication that Stephen Beard was ever physically or mentally abusive towards Celeste or the twins.
Celeste was saying that he was mean and just not a nice person, which wasn't the truth, Steve was someone that I looked up to, and I loved him.
Tracy, with her own history of childhood abuse, said she bought the story hook, line, and sinker.
Tracy really came to see him as a monster because Celeste had painted him this way.
Tracy said the two of them began scheming for ways to spend more time together without Stephen getting in the way.
Stephen liked to have a cocktail in the evening, and Celeste would substitute Everclear, which is obviously a much higher proof alcohol, so that he would pass out.
The Everclear would put him to bed around 10 o'clock, and then she could go out with Tracy until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning.
Tracy admitted that over time, their scheming became more sinister.
Celeste asked Tracy to purchase ecstasy pills that she then crushes up and puts in his drink with the hopes that he will overdose. She also asked Tracy to order a book for a recipe to poison him with a meal.
The way Tracy told it was that they got this book, they cooked up some kind of recipe, put it into a chili dog, and served it to Stephen, but nothing happened as far as he survived whatever concoction they made.
According to Tracy, that's when Celeste decided they needed to get more hands-on.
Celeste has put sleeping pills into his food, and he is knocked out cold one evening. Together, they each take turns putting a plastic bag over poor Stephen's head to try to asphyxiate him to death. But Tracy says that she can't continue doing it because of her conscience.
Just 3 months later, Tracy agreed to an even more disturbing plan.
Celeste knew that Tracy had a shotgun, and she told Tracy to get Stephen out of the picture. It's either Celeste or it's Stephen, and Tracy needed to do something.
Tracy said on the night of October 1st, 1999, Celeste turned off the burglar alarm and unlocked the sliding glass door in Stephen's bedroom.
Tracy gets there. She's able to access the bedroom. He's sleeping. And she shoots. Once she shot, he was startled, she was startled, and all she could think about was getting out of there.
That's when Tracy told police a real shocker. She claimed that she may have shot Stephen Beard, but she didn't kill him. Celeste did.
Tracy Tarleton said that Celeste, when she would change the wounds, was putting everything she could to infect the wound, and he got an infection, and that's what killed him.
But Celeste is insistent that Stephen's fatal infection didn't come from her care.
That's just another one of their lies. He wasn't home long enough.
It wasn't something we were able to prove, but certainly it was like, that's just too much of a coincidence. It does not take much to introduce pretty strong infection into open wounds.
For investigators, there was still the question of why Celeste would want to kill her husband rather than simply divorcing him.
There was a prenuptial agreement. A lot of Stephen's wealth had been incurred before the marriage, so her entitlement to that was going to be very limited. In her mind, she was definitely going to benefit more by his death than by a divorce.
Based on Tracy's confession, authorities obtained an arrest warrant for Celeste, now known as Celeste Beard Johnson, on charges of capital murder. At the time, she was preparing for a big holiday with her new husband.
We were getting ready for the Easter weekend. I got a call that the groomers were ready for us to pick up the babies. They were getting their hair done. And when I went to pick them up, I was arrested. I never even thought in a million years that I was going to be charged with Stephen's shooting. Never.
As preparations for Celeste's trial began, prosecutors knew they'd need compelling witnesses to back Tracy Tarleton's story. And soon, they'd find two.
It makes me sick. You always hear blood is thicker than water, not in my case.
Coming up, Celeste's own daughters turn against their mother.
At the time, it felt like testifying was the only option to get any justice for Steve, to actually have Celeste pay for what she has done.
Shame on you.
My kids sold me to the state of Texas.
On February 3rd, 2003, 3 years after her husband Stephen had died from an infected gunshot wound, Celeste Beard Johnson walked into the Travis County Courthouse to stand trial for capital murder.
I was devastated. When they arrested me, I had no idea about anything in the criminal justice system.
Penalty for capital murder in Texas is life in prison.
The newly remarried mother of two steadfastly denied the accusations, entering a plea of not guilty.
I'm not guilty. I will never admit to anything that I didn't do.
Prosecutors opened the trial by painting Celeste as a manipulative gold digger who had married Stephen Beard for one reason and one reason only: money.
It was pure greed and selfishness. She's somebody who married him because she loved money.
But when her extravagant spending habits threatened her marriage, prosecutors say Celeste began a steamy lesbian affair with Tracy Tarleton and convinced her that the only way they could be together was to murder Celeste's husband.
She liked having a lot of money. She couldn't wait for him to die. And the evidence will show that she did not wait.
Celeste's attorney didn't dispute the fact that greed was at the root of this case. But, he claimed, it wasn't Celeste's greed, it was Tracy Tarleton's.
She fell in love with Celeste and she was obsessed with her. She saw Steve as the one impediment to Tracy Tarleton's happiness forever. And so she wanted to get rid of Steve. So Tracy, we believe the evidence will show you, shot Stephen Beard for her own selfish and sick reason.
But when Tracy took the stand, she claimed she never wanted to shoot Stephen.
Celeste manipulated Tracy. And the whole general kind of theme of the manipulation was, it's him or me. In other words, Stephen or Celeste.
She had a plan, and she wanted me to shoot him with my shotgun. I said, I don't want to do this. She said, there's nothing left. I might as well just take it right now and shoot myself. And I said, fine, let's go. I'll do it.
She's crazy. I mean, she truly believed that we would have a life together. She had this delusion that we were going to live happily ever after at my lake house.
Tracy's testimony was effective, but the state wasn't done yet. Prosecutors called two more witnesses to the stand: Celeste's own daughters.
It makes me sick. You always hear blood is thicker than water, not in my case. I want to call them the Menendez sisters.
The girls corroborated Tracy's story of a lesbian affair and their mother's secret hatred for the man they considered their father.
Tracy leaned over and kissed Celeste. Was it a quick kiss on the mouth, or can you describe it? From what I can tell, it was an open mouth kiss. It lasted for a couple of seconds.
Felt like testifying was the only option to get any sort of freedom in our life, to get any justice for Steve, to have Celeste pay for what she has done.
Shame on you.
However, Celeste's defense said the twins were just trying to get their hands on Celeste's inheritance.
When they found out that they weren't going to get any money until I died or went to prison, that's when they turned against me. My kids sold me to the state of Texas.
I try not to think about her thinking that we're all full of lies now at this point. We told the truth on the stand, and I'm glad it's over. That was the last time that I can remember even seeing Celeste. It's been over 20 years.
When the jury retired to consider the verdict, it took them 3 days to reach a decision.
Verdict form 1, capital murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Celeste Beard Johnson, guilty of the offense of capital murder. You may be seated.
They said guilty of capital murder. And I did not have any expression on my face. I just stood there and took it. And I wasn't going to let that judge or anybody else see how bad they had hurt me.
Celeste was sentenced to life in prison.
I was devastated. It's not right that I'm spending the rest of my life in prison and there is no evidence against me. I just wish somebody would come forward and help me.
Tracy Tarleton received a 20-year sentence in exchange for her testimony. She was paroled in 2011.
It's hard to believe that she's already out. I have absolutely no contact with Tracy. I want to live my life in peace and try and move forward.
Celeste has attempted to appeal her case to no avail.
There's a night that I don't ask God not to wake me up in the morning because I've been here 19 years.
Why should she have to stay any longer than the shooter? She did not shoot Stephen. Tracy Tarleton did it.
Celeste still has no relationship with her 2 daughters.
I have not spoken with either one of them since this happened. I wish that my kids would just give me a chance. I am not the same person I was 20 years ago. I'm not.
It's pretty obvious that Celeste is evil. It makes me sick to my stomach and sad for the pain and suffering that he went through. So I will never forgive her. I never want to see her. I don't ever want to talk to her again.
I'm not a threat to anybody. I'm not a threat. And I would have rather been given the death sentence and given a lethal injection than to be in this prison for as long as I've been in, rotting in here for something that I didn't do, because this is the other death penalty. This life sentence is a death penalty, and it's just wrong.
It begins with a sound no one remembers clearly anymore. A door closing. Maybe a car pulling away. Maybe nothing at all. Just the absence that followed. The kind of silence that feels louder than any scream. The kind that settles into a town and never quite leaves. Washington, gray and damp. The kind of place where rain erases footprints before anyone thinks to look for them. The kind of place where secrets rot slowly under layers of moss and memory. This was not supposed to be a story. Not at first. It was just another night. Another routine. Another life moving through familiar streets without knowing it was about to vanish into headlines that didn't exist yet. Into a case file that would one day be stamped cold, shelved, forgotten, misfiled, misjudged, misunderstood. The victim wasn't famous. No spotlight. No warning signs. A name printed once in a local paper. Then again on a missing person flyer taped to grocery store windows and telephone poles. A face that looked ordinary enough to blend into a crowd, which made the disappearance even more unsettling. Because when someone extraordinary vanishes, people talk. When someone ordinary disappears, people assume there must be a reason, a bad choice, a secret life, a quiet escape. Washington has always been good at that, offering excuses wrapped in weather, letting the fog do the work of forgetting. The night itself offered nothing dramatic. No witnesses running. No shattered glass. No frantic calls flooding dispatch lines. Just a timeline that stopped making sense. Last seen at a familiar place. Last spoken to by someone who would later swear the conversation was unremarkable, No raised voices. No fear. No hint of what was coming. And that's what made it dangerous. Because the most violent stories often begin in stillness, in routine, in the false comfort of normalcy. By morning, concern crept in quietly. A missed shift, an unanswered phone, a car still parked where it shouldn't be. The first officer on scene didn't feel urgency. Not yet. Washington law enforcement had seen disappearances before. People drifted. People relapsed. People left town chasing something unnamed. The report was taken. Notes were scribbled. The case was opened without ceremony, without the sense that it would one day define careers, haunt families, and expose a truth buried under decades of procedural dust. The search began politely. Questions asked gently. Friends interviewed with soft voices and softer suspicions. The community reacted the way communities often do, with curiosity first, then concern, then fatigue. Candlelight vigils flickered and went dark. Flyers peeled and fell. Time did what it always does best. It moved forward, indifferent, but somewhere in those early hours, something critical was missed. A detail written down wrong. An item bagged but never tested. A witness dismissed because their story didn't fit the narrative forming too quickly in the minds of tired investigators. The scene itself offered clues that looked meaningless in isolation. A scuffed patch of ground near where the victim was last seen. Tire marks too common to catalog. A personal item that could have been dropped days earlier. Nothing screamed murder. Nothing demanded urgency. And yet, something about the air that night lingered, a sense of wrongness that would only become obvious in hindsight, when hindsight was all anyone had left. As days passed, pressure mounted. Families demanded answers. Editors demanded updates. Detectives worked longer hours, flipping through notebooks, chasing tips that led nowhere. Sightings poured in from nearby towns, then neighboring states. Each one raised hope, then crushed it. The victim became a shadow moving through gas stations, bus stops, cheap motels. Always almost there, never real. The case file thickened with paper, but thinned in substance. Leads contradicted each other. Alibis overlapped too neatly. Timelines bent and twisted until no one could say with confidence when the disappearance had truly begun. And then came the first mistake that would echo for years. Investigators narrowed their focus too quickly. A theory took hold, seductive in its simplicity. A suspect who fit just enough. A story that explained the lack of struggle, the absence of witnesses, the sudden vanishing act. Once that story took root, everything else was filtered through it. Evidence that didn't fit was set aside. Statements that complicated the picture were labeled unreliable. The case began to harden around an assumption, and assumptions, once baked into official reports, are nearly impossible to undo. Washington winters arrived, heavy and wet. Search efforts slowed. Budgets tightened. Personnel shifted. The lead detective was reassigned. Another took over, inheriting a file already shaped by decisions they hadn't made. The victim's family aged visibly, grief carving lines into their faces that no amount of hope could erase. They called. They wrote letters. They were told the same thing again and again. The investigation was ongoing. Resources were limited. New information would be pursued. Behind closed doors, the case drifted closer to a label no family ever wants to hear. Cold case. The words didn't appear all at once. They arrived gradually, disguised as delays, as unreturned calls, as meetings postponed indefinitely. The evidence was boxed. The file was archived. The name was added to a list that grew longer every year. For the department, it was one unresolved case among many. For the family, it was a life pause forever in the space between questions and answers. Years passed. Technology changed. DNA analysis evolved. Databases expanded. But the case remained untouched, trapped in the logic of the era that birthed it. Evidence sat in storage. Some of it mislabeled, some of it never properly examined. A single item, small, unremarkable, rested in an envelope that no one thought to open again. It didn't look important. It didn't feel urgent. It was logged, signed, forgotten. And yet, that piece of evidence was patient. The town changed too. New buildings rose where old ones stood. Streets were renamed. Businesses came and went. People who remembered the disappearance spoke of it less and less, until it became a rumor, a cautionary tale told to newcomers who listened politely, but never truly felt its weight. The victim's name faded from conversation, but the absence remained. Like a missing brick in a wall, everyone learned to lean around. Inside the department, a new generation of detectives arrived, armed with fresh training and different instincts. They were taught to question old assumptions, to distrust tidy narratives, to revisit what others had dismissed. One of them stumbled across the file by accident, while looking for something else entirely. A dusty box, a familiar label, a case number that hadn't been spoken aloud in years. Curiosity sparked, not because the case was famous, but because it wasn't, because it ended without ending. Reading through the reports felt like reading a story with missing pages. Interviews cut short. Follow-ups never conducted. Evidence referenced once and never again. And there it was, the forgotten item. Logged, stored, never tested, never explained. The kind of oversight that happens not because of malice, but because of momentum. Because once a case slows down, everything slows with it. The detective hesitated. Reopening old wounds came with consequences, political, emotional, professional. Cold cases carry ghosts, and ghosts don't like being disturbed. But something about this one resisted being left alone. Maybe it was the simplicity of the oversight. Maybe it was the weight of all the years that had passed without an answer. Maybe it was a quiet accusation embedded in every unanswered question. When the evidence was finally re-examined, it didn't announce itself. No dramatic reveal. No instant clarity. Just data, numbers, chemical markers that didn't care how much time had passed. The lab processed it with modern tools, unaware they were about to reopen a door sealed decades earlier. And when the results came back, they didn't just contradict the old theory, they destroyed it. A name surfaced, not from the original suspect list, not from the witness interviews. A name buried in another file, another case, another life that had intersected briefly with the victim's world and then disappeared from view. A connection no one had seen because no one had been looking for it. The kind of connection that only reveals itself when the past is interrogated with the tools of the present. The breakthrough didn't feel triumphant. It felt unsettling, because it meant the truth had been there all along, waiting quietly while years slipped by. It meant the right answer hadn't been lost. It had been ignored. And as detectives began pulling threads, they realized this wasn't just about solving a murder. It was about confronting everything that had gone wrong along the way. The community would soon learn that the story they thought they knew was incomplete, that the real danger hadn't vanished into the night. It had lived openly, unnoticed, protected by time and oversight. And as the investigation accelerated once more, as old witnesses were tracked down and memories were forced awake, one question echoed louder than all the others. How many years can the truth survive being forgotten before it demands to be found again? The night keeps breathing even after the sirens fade, a dry Washington wind sliding to the pines and rattling the caution tape like a whisper that won't shut up. And the ground remembers every footstep pressed into it, every knee bent, every hand that trembled when the flashlight beam finally settled on what should never been there, because this was supposed to be just another patch of woods behind a forgotten service road, not a place where time would split open and swallow a life. Whole, not a place the town would carry like a scar for decades. The first deputies arrived with coffee still warm in their cups, jokes half finished in their mouths, and then silence clamps down hard, because the scene doesn't care about routine, doesn't care about the way things are supposed to go, and the air feels thick, metallic, like rain that never falls. They marked the perimeter, yellow tape stretching wider than expected, because something about the way the earth is disturbed suggests movement, a struggle that didn't want to end quietly. And the smell hits next, faint but unmistakable, death mingled with wet leaves and engine oil from the nearby road. Flashlights sweep, pause, sweep again, catching fiber snagged on thorns, a shoe half buried in loam, the suggestion of a path where none should exist, and in that moment the case is born without a name, without a face, just a weight that settles on everyone standing there. By dawn, the scene is crowded with people who pretend they've seen this before but haven't, not like this. Not with the way the evidence seems to hide and reveal itself at the same time, and the body is finally lifted, zipped away, leaving an absence that somehow feels louder than its presence ever was. Back at the station, fluorescent lights buzz and paperwork piles up fast. Each form a promise that this won't be forgotten, that every detail will be chased down, that the dead will speak if someone just listens hard enough. They start with what they have, which isn't much. A rough timeline stitched together from a gas station receipt, a witness who thought they heard shouting but couldn't be sure. Tire impressions that look ordinary until you stare at them long enough and realize nothing about this night was ordinary. Detectives talk in low voices, leaning over maps with coffee rings staining the paper, tracing routes in red pen, imagining turns, stops, moments of hesitation that might explain how someone ended up so far off the grid. The victim's name circulates through the building like a fragile thing, spoken carefully, attached to a photograph pinned to a corkboard, a smile caught mid-laugh, a life frozen in a rectangle of glossy paper. Family members sit in a small room down the hall, hands clenched, eyes hollow, waiting for answers no one as yet, and the promise of justice feels thin when held up against the rawness in their faces. Hours turn into days, days into weeks, and the investigation expands outward, canvassing neighborhoods where curtains twitch and doors open just enough to let questions slip through. Some people are eager to help, eager to feel useful in the face of something terrible, while others shrink back, memories suddenly foggy, routine suddenly rigid, as if keeping the script might keep suspicion away. Tips come in hot and fast at first. Every strange car, every argument overheard, every person who just didn't seem right. And detectives chase them all, because the worst thing you can do at the beginning is assume you know what matters. The forgotten evidence isn't forgotten yet. Not officially, not at this stage, because everything is logged, bagged, tagged, and stored, each item assigned a number, and a place on a shelf that feels like a vault of secrets. There are fibers that don't match the victim's clothing, a partial print smudged enough to be frustrating, a trace of something on the skin that could be nothing or could be everything depending on what science can pull from it. Lab requests are sent, results awaited, patience stretched thin by the ticking clock that everyone pretends doesn't exist but feels anyway. And then the waiting begins, that slow erosion of certainty as leads dry up and witnesses stop answering calls, as the initial shock dulls into something quieter, heavier. The town moves on because it has to, because grocery stores still open and schools still ring their bells. But the case lingers in conversations, in glances exchanged at community meetings, in the way parents hold their kids a little closer at night. Detectives push harder, working angles that feel less promising but can't be ignored, revisiting the scene in their minds until they can see it with their eyes closed, every tree, every shadow, every place someone could hide. They argue, they doubt, they circle back on themselves, because the truth isn't presenting itself neatly, and the pressure from above is subtle but constant, a reminder that resources are finite and new cases keep coming. The file grows thick, heavy enough to thud when it's dropped on a desk, and still there's no arrest, no headline moment where everything clicks into place. Instead, there are questions stacked on questions, a sense that something critical is just out of reach, sitting in a blind spot everyone keeps missing. Evidence gets re-examined, notes reread, theories built and dismantled. Because in this job you learn fast that the obvious answer is rarely the right one. Years begin to creep in, measured not by calendars but by changes in the room, new faces at the desks, promotions, retirements, a different chief with a different way of talking about priorities. The case is reviewed, then reviewed again, its status quietly shifting from active to unsolved, a phrase that sounds neutral but feels like failure to those who carried it from start. The family keeps asking, keeps calling, and each time the response is careful, respectful, threaded with regret, because there's nothing new to give them, nothing solid to hold on to. The evidence room becomes a place of ghosts, shelves lined with boxes that represent moments where the world broke for someone, and this case takes its place among them, labeled, dated, waiting. The forgotten evidence begins its long sleep here, not because anyone decided it didn't matter, but because without context, without a match, without a reason to pull it back into the light, it might as well be invisible. Still, the case refuses to die completely. A detective who was there that first night keeps a copy of the photo in a drawer, pulls it out sometimes when the station is quiet, when the hum of the building feels like breathing. He remembers the smell of the woods, the way the flashlight beam shook in his hand, and he knows deep down that the story isn't finished, that something about it never made sense and never will until the right piece is found. Rumors surface and sink, a name whispered here, another there, but nothing sticks, Nothing holds up under scrutiny, and the town learns to live with the unanswered questions, to fold them into its identity. Anniversaries come and go with small mentions in paper, a candlelight vigil that draws fewer people each year, the memory fading at the edges but never fully disappearing. Time, it turns out, is both enemy and ally. It erases urgency, blurs recollections, lets guilt harden into something easier to carry, but also preserves what was overlooked, locking away until someone thinks to look again. The forgotten evidence waits patiently, unchanged by the passing years, indifferent to the way careers rise and fall, to the way technology evolves, to the way justice seems to drift further away with every season. And somewhere in that quiet waiting, the case gathers tension, like a held breath that can't be released yet, because the truth is still there, still intact, buried not just in the woods where it began, but in boxes, in reports, in a single detail that hasn't been given the attention it deserves. The killer moves through life unchallenged, or so it seems, while the town carries on, unaware that the key to everything is already in custody, already cataloged, already forgotten, just waiting for the moment when someone finally opens the right box and realizes the past has been trying to speak all along. Morning light changes nothing. It only sharpens the edges, and years later that light finds its way back into the case through a different window, a different building, a different set of eyes that weren't there the first time. The file is pulled again not with ceremony but with irritation, a cold case unit looking for something to justify its own existence, a stack of unsolveds needing fresh air, and this one lands on the desk with dull thud, heavier than it looks, heavier than it should feel after so much time. Pages whisper as they're turned, names resurface like half-remembered dreams, and the story begins to breathe again, slow at first, tentative, like it's unsure whether it's safe to come back. The new detective reads everything, every report, every margin note scribbled at 2 a.m. decades ago, absorbing the rhythm of the original investigation, the confidence, the doubt, the places where momentum stalled and never quite recovered. He notices patterns not because he's smarter, but because he's distant, untouched by the emotional gravity that pulled the first team into familiar orbits. He sees what they saw, but he also sees what they didn't linger on, details brushed past because there were louder things demanding attention at the time. He goes to the evidence room, a place that smells like dust and disinfectant, where history sits in cardboard boxes stacked with bureaucratic precision. He signs forms, waits for keys, watches a technician pull the right container from the shelf. And there it is, unassuming, its label faded but legible, the date stamped in ink that has begun to bleed. When the lid comes off, nothing dramatic happens. No swell of music, no sudden revelation, just objects resting quietly, exactly as they were left. He lifts each item carefully, reading the tags, cross-referencing numbers with reports, building the scene in his head the way it was meant to be built from the beginning. The fibers, the partial print, the trace material that was tested once and set aside because it didn't fit anything known at the time. He pauses there, longer than necessary, fingers hovering over a bag that seems to pull at his attention for reasons he can't immediately explain. It's a small thing, easily overlooked, a sample that produced inconclusive results back when science had more limits and less patience. Back at his desk, he spreads everything out, recreating the case in miniature, timelines pinned down with color-coded notes, photographs arranged in a way that tells a different story than the official narrative. He notices gaps, moments where assumptions were made to keep things moving, moments where one theory crowded out others because it felt cleaner, easier to chase. He doesn't accuse the past investigators of negligence. He understands the pressure they were under, the noise, the chaos of a town demanding answers. But understanding doesn't stop him from questioning. And questioning is where this case has been waiting all along. He orders new tests, updated analyses using techniques that didn't exist when the evidence was first logged, and the requests move through the system with the quiet efficiency of modern procedure. There's no fanfare, no urgency in the emails, just routine language that hides a potential weight of what's being asked. While he waits, he drives the old routes, stands where the body was found, listens to the wind through the trees, and tries to imagine the night as it was, not as it's been remembered. The town has changed, grown outward, paved over some of its rough edges, but the woods remain stubbornly the same, dense and indifferent, holding their secrets close. He stands there and feels it again, that sense that something is off, that the geography doesn't quite match the official version of events, that someone knew this place well enough to choose it, to move through it without hesitation. That kind of familiarity doesn't come from nowhere, and it doesn't disappear just because time has passed. The lab results arrive quietly, an email notification that doesn't hint at what it contains, and he opens it without ceremony, expecting incremental clarity at best. Instead, his pulse quickens as he reads, then reads again, because the language is careful but unmistakable. The trace material that once meant nothing now means something. A profile emerging where there was only noise before, a possibility solid enough to grab onto. It's not a name yet, not an arrest, but it's a direction, a way forward that hasn't existed for years. He cross-checks databases that didn't exist when the case was fresh, watches as algorithms do in seconds what once took weeks, and suddenly there it is, a partial match that tightens into something more convincing with every update. A person who brushed against the edges of the investigation once. Dismissed because there wasn't enough to hold them, because the evidence couldn't speak clearly enough back then. The forgotten evidence is forgotten no more, and it's starting to talk. He pulls the old interview transcripts, reads the suspect's words with new eyes, hearing the pauses, the evasions, the places where answers were technically complete but emotionally hollow. He notices how timelines bend slightly under scrutiny, how alibis rely on people who can no longer be found or no longer remember. None of it was enough to act on before, but now it feels different, heavier, because it's being supported by something tangible, something objective. The department moves cautiously, aware of the stakes, aware of the scrutiny that comes with reopening wounds that were never allowed to heal properly. Supervisors are briefed, legal counsel consulted, every step measured to avoid missteps that could unravel everything. The family is notified that there may be movement, careful words chosen to spark hope without promising relief, and their reactions are a mixture of guarded optimism and exhaustion, because hope has hurt them before. As the investigation tightens, the suspect's life comes into focus, a series of choices and patterns that look ordinary on the surface, but align too neatly with the gaps in the case to ignore. He lived nearby, worked odd hours, knew the back roads, the service paths, the places where no one looks twice. He aged, changed jobs, started a family, built a version of himself that didn't include the night in the woods, and for years that version was enough to keep him safe. Surveillance begins discreetly, nothing dramatic, just eyes watching routines, noting habits, looking for cracks where the past might leak through. Detectives debate strategy, argue over timing, because they know that confronting him too early could spook him into silence, but waiting too long risks losing momentum again. The case balances on that thin edge between patience and urgency, and everyone involved feels the weight of it pressing down. When they finally bring him in, it's almost anticlimactic, a request for a conversation, a chair in a small room, a recorder placed on the table with deliberate care. He looks older than in the photographs, grayer, slower, but his eyes sharpen when the questions turn specific, when details emerge that only someone who would recognize as dangerous. He denies, deflects, smiles at inappropriate moments, a performance honed over years of not being caught. They don't push too hard at first, letting the silence do its work, letting him talk himself into corners he doesn't realize are closing in. They introduce the evidence gradually, not revealing everything, just enough to unsettle him, to force recalculations. When the trace material is mentioned, his posture shifts almost imperceptibly, a reaction so small it could be missed if you weren't looking for it, if you didn't already know what it meant. Outside the room, the team watches through glass, hearts pounding in professional unison, because this is a moment they've been working toward, the moment where decades of waiting might finally converge into something definitive. Inside, the suspect's confidence begins to fray, words coming faster, explanations overlapping, the careful mask slipping as the reality of the situation presses in. He asks questions he should know to ask, references details that were never public, and each slip tightens the net a little more. The detectives stay calm, methodical, because they know that pressure applied too suddenly can shatter the fragile structure they're building. They let him talk, let him rationalize, let him reveal pieces of the truth in his own attempt to control the narrative. By the time the interview ends, nothing has been fully confessed, but everything has changed. The forgotten evidence has done its job, not by screaming, but by standing firm, by refusing to be ignored any longer. The case that once felt like a dead end now hums with possibility, with a sense that the long night is finally edging toward dawn, even if the sun hasn't broken the horizon yet. Word spreads quietly through the department, then outward, whispers of a breakthrough in a case most people barely remember, and the town begins to stir, memories resurfacing, conversations restarting. The family waits again, this time with a different kind of tension, afraid to believe, afraid not to, caught between the pain they know and the closure they've been denied for so long. And as the suspect is released pending further action, as warrants are prepared and prosecutors weigh their options, one thing becomes clear to everyone involved. The past never stopped watching, never stopped leaving traces of itself behind. It was patient, relentless, confident that sooner or later, someone would listen closely enough to hear what it had been saying all along. Night settles differently now, heavier, charged, as if the town itself senses a shift and doesn't quite know how to react. The suspect goes home, but he doesn't go back to normal, because normal is a fragile illusion once the past has been invited into the room and allowed to sit down. Detectives feel it too, the hum beneath their skin, the knowledge that something irreversible has begun even if nothing has been formally declared. Files are no longer static objects. They're live wires, capable of delivering shock with a single overlooked detail. In the days that follow, everything slows and accelerates at the same time. Paperwork multiplies, meetings stretch late into the evening, and every conversation circles the same unspoken truth. They are closer than anyone has ever been, and closeness carries risk. Prosecutors want certainty, not intuition, not the poetic satisfaction of a theory finally coming together. They want chains of custody, airtight explanations, answers to questions that haven't even been asked yet. The detectives understand this, but they also understand the danger of hesitation, how easily momentum can evaporate if not guarded. They return to the evidence again, not because they doubt it, but because they respect it enough to interrogate it fully. The trace material is re-examined, peer-reviewed, subjected to scrutiny so intense it borders on obsession. Independent labs confirm the results, each report adding another layer of credibility, another brick in a structure that is beginning to feel permanent. There is relief in that confirmation, but also fear, because the more solid the case becomes, the more devastating its implications grow. The suspect senses a shift without being told. He changes routines, leaves lights on at night, glances at passing cars with suspicion that borders on paranoia. He tells himself it's coincidence, that this is just stress resurfacing old anxieties, but his body remembers what his mind tries to suppress. Memory doesn't announce itself politely. It intrudes, bringing with it fragments of sound, smell, pressure. Sleep becomes unreliable. Dreams crowded with images he thought had been buried deep enough to stay silent. Detectives watch from a distance, cataloging these changes, careful not to let surveillance become harassment, mindful of the thin legal line they walk. They document everything, because documentation is armor, and they will need every piece of it. The suspect's world begins to feel smaller, constricted by invisible boundaries, and while no one says out loud, everyone knows that pressure changes behavior. People make mistakes when they feel cornered, even when the corners are made of their own secrets. The family is called in again, this time not with vague reassurances, but with cautious specificity. They are told that progress has been made, that evidence once considered useless has gained new meaning, that the person responsible may finally have a name attached. The words land unevenly, hope colliding with grief, relief tangled with anger. They have learned to distrust good news, to brace themselves against disappointment. But there is something different in the tone now, a steadiness that feels earned rather than performative. They return home afterward and sit with the weight of it, surrounded by photographs that have faded but not lost their power. They imagine justice not as a clean ending, but as a complicated beginning, reopening wounds even as it promises to heal them. For years they were told to move on, to accept that some questions remain unanswered. Now those questions are knocking again, louder, more insistent, and ignoring them is no longer an option. Back at the station, detectives begin reconstructing the night itself, minute by minute, using modern tools to map movements that were once impossible to track. Cell tower data, traffic patterns, weather reports, all layered together to form a digital echo of the past. The picture that emerges challenges assumptions that went untested for decades, suggesting routes taken not by chance, but by design. It reinforces the idea that the crime was not impulsive, not random, but the product of familiarity and intent. They find inconsistencies in the suspect's historical statements that now stand out with painful clarity. Times don't align. Distances don't make sense. Small lies, harmless on their own, stack into something unmistakable when viewed as a whole. The suspect had reasons to be where he claimed not to be, opportunities he insisted never existed. Each discrepancy is logged, analyzed, prepared for eventual confrontation, because preparation is the difference between accusation and proof. The detectives debate strategy deep into the night, voices low, coffee growing cold between them. Do they bring him back in now, armed with more data but still short of confession? Or do they wait, build quietly, let the pressure increase naturally? Experience argues both sides, and there is no perfect answer, only calculated risk. They know that time, once the enemy, has become an unpredictable ally, capable of revealing truths, but also of giving the suspect room to maneuver. Outside, the town begins to talk. Rumors surface on social media, vague posts hinting at movement. In an old case, speculation spreading faster than facts ever could. The department remains silent, aware that public pressure can contaminate an investigation as easily as it can energize it. But silence has its own cost, and every passing day adds another layer of anticipation, another expectation waiting to be either fulfilled or crushed. The suspect notices the whispers too, sees familiar names discussing the past with a casual curiosity that feels invasive. He withdraws further, limiting contact, avoiding places where conversations might turn uncomfortable. People who once knew him begin to reevaluate old interactions, memories shifting under the influence of new context. Innocuous moments gain darker interpretations, and the suspect feels eyes on him even when none are there. A second interview is scheduled, this time less tentative, more deliberate. The room is the same, but the energy is different, charged with information that hasn't yet been spoken aloud. The detectives enter calm, controlled, every question mapped in advance, every possible answer anticipated. The suspect tries to reassert confidence, but it doesn't hold the way it once did. The space between questions feels longer, the silence more oppressive. They present the evidence methodically, not as an attack, but as an inevitability. Timelines tighten, locations converge. The trace material is no longer abstract science, but a physical link tying him to a moment he has denied for years. His denials become sharper, more defensive, and that defensiveness speaks volumes. He challenges procedures, questions validity, clings to technicalities like life rafts, but each challenge is met with documentation, with patience, with quiet certainty. At one point, he stops talking altogether, retreating behind a wall of silence that feels less like strategy and more like surrender. The detectives don't push past it. They know when to stop, when to let the weight of what's been revealed do its work. When the interview ends, the room feels smaller, as if the truth has consumed some of the available space. Prosecutors review the new material with cautious optimism, their language measured, their expressions guarded. They know the scrutiny this case will attract, the microscope will be placed under if charges are filed. Cold cases don't just ask for justice. They demand explanation, accountability not only from the perpetrator, but from the system that allowed time to pass unchecked. Every decision now carries symbolic weight. As preparations for warrants move forward, the detectives revisit the woods one last time, standing where the night once swallowed everything whole. The air is still, the ground unchanged, indifferent to the human drama unfolding around it. But for the detectives, the place feels different now, less like a question mark and more like a statement waiting to be read aloud. They know the end is approaching, even if its shape remains uncertain. Arrest or trial or confession, whatever form it takes, it will not be clean, not satisfying the way fiction promises. But it will be something, and something is more than this case has had for decades. The forgotten evidence has pulled the past into the present, and neither the town nor the people at the center of this story will ever be able to pretend it didn't happen. The night deepens again, but this time it doesn't feel endless. It feels watchful, heavy with anticipation, as if the silence itself is holding its breath, waiting for the moment when the truth, long buried and fiercely guarded, finally decides it has been patient enough. Mourning breaks without ceremony, but nothing about this day feels ordinary. The arrest warrant is signed quietly, without applause, without speeches, ink pressed into paper by hands that understand the weight of what they're authorizing. A name that once lived only in speculation now sits squarely in the center of a legal document, no longer protected by ambiguity. The detectives read it twice, then a third time, not because they doubt it, but because finality deserves respect. This is the moment where preparation ends and consequence begins. The suspect is taken into custody just after sunrise. No dramatic chase. No resistance. The door opens. Confusion flashes across his face. Then something else. Recognition, perhaps, or resignation. He knows why they're there. He has known for days, maybe longer, that this was coming. The words are spoken calmly. Rights read clearly. Cuffs secured with practiced precision. Neighbors watch through curtains. Phones lifted, whispers forming in real time. The past has stepped into the open, and it's wearing a badge now. At the station, the atmosphere shifts instantly. The building feels sharper, more alert, like a place that understands history is happening inside its walls. Officers who weren't part of the original investigation pause to take it in, aware they're witnessing the closing of a chapter that began before some of them were even born. The suspect is processed methodically, fingerprints taken again, photographs captured under harsh fluorescent light that offers no shadows to hide in. Interrogation begins not as an ambush, but as a reckoning. The detectives lay out the case with a clarity that has taken years to earn. Evidence flows in a steady line, each piece reinforcing the next, leaving fewer and fewer gaps for denial to slip through. The suspect listens, jaw tight, eyes fixed on a point just beyond the table, as if staring long enough might open a door back to the past, to a time when silence was enough. They talk about the evidence that was missed, not as an accusation against the system, but as a fact, a forgotten item, a mislabeled box, a test that technology couldn't yet perform. They explain how time, the very thing he relied on, eventually turned against him. How progress doesn't forget, it only waits. The suspect's breathing changes, shallow now, uneven, the body reacting even as the mouth stays closed. Hours pass. Questions circle back, not repeating, but tightening, approaching from different angles. Each version of the story the suspect once told is revisited. Compare against data that did not exist when those lies were formed. His answers grow shorter. His confidence erodes. The room feels heavier with each minute, as though the air itself is pressing for honesty. Outside the interrogation room, prosecutors watch through glass, expressions unreadable. They know confessions are unpredictable, unreliable, sometimes unnecessary. What matters is what can be proven, and this case, once fragile, now feels unbreakable. Still they wait, because sometimes truth arrives not through force, but through exhaustion. The family is notified just after the arrest becomes official. The call is brief, factual, careful. There is no celebration in the voice on the other end, only confirmation. It's real. It's happening. The person responsible has been named and taken into custody. The family listens in silence, absorbing words they've waited decades to hear. Some cry. Some don't. Relief and grief collide in ways that defy explanation. They gather later that day, sitting together in a living room that has borne witness to too many anniversaries, too many unanswered questions. The television hums softly in the background, news coverage looping the same headline over and over. A cold case solved, a breakthrough, an arrest after decades. The words feel strange, almost intrusive, applied to something so deeply personal. Back at the station, the suspect finally speaks. Not a full confession. Not yet, but a crack. A statement that contradicts earlier claims. A detail he couldn't have known unless he was there. The detectives exchange glances, subtle, controlled. They don't interrupt. They let him talk. Because when people start revising their stories, it's often because the truth is pushing too hard to stay buried. He stops himself midway, realizing what he said, tries to backtrack, to minimize. But it's too late. The moment has passed. The record has been made. The past has slipped out through a door he forgot was unlocked. The interrogation ends shortly after. Not because there's nothing left to ask, but because there's no need to rush what is already unfolding. Charges are filed. The language is formal, precise, stripped of emotion. But behind every word sits a history of pain, of failure, of relentless pursuit. The document moves through the system with surprising speed, propelled by a momentum that has been building for years. Court dates are set. Legal teams assemble. The machinery of justice, long dormant in this case, roars back to life. The town reacts in waves. Shock gives way to reflection. People revisit their own memories of that year, that season, that night. They wonder what they missed, what they assumed. How many answers were hiding in plain sight? Trust is questioned, not just in individuals, but in the idea that time erases responsibility. This case proves it doesn't. The suspect sits alone in a holding cell, the noise of the station muffled, replaced by the echo of his own thoughts. There is no escape here, no familiar routines to cling to, just concrete, steel, and the slow realization that the story he controlled for so long is no longer his to tell. As night falls again, the case moves forward, unstoppable now. The forgotten evidence has done more than expose a killer. It has rewritten an ending that once felt inevitable. The silence that protected the truth for decades has been broken, and in its place stands something far more powerful, accountability that arrived late, but arrived nonetheless. The courtroom smells faintly of old wood and fresh paper, a place built to absorb history without reacting to it. Yet even these walls seem to sense the gravity of what's unfolding. The first hearing is procedural, almost mundane in structure, but nothing about the atmosphere is ordinary. Every seat is filled. Journalists line the back wall, pens hovering, cameras silent but ready. The suspect is led in wearing the uniform of custody, a visual rupture that still feels surreal to those who remember him as just another face in the community. He keeps his eyes forward, expression carefully neutral, but the tension radiates from him anyway, a low-frequency hum that fills the room. The judge speaks, words precise, unemotional, laying out charges that sound clinical until you understand what they represent. Years stolen, lives derailed, a truth suppressed for far too long. The suspect enters a plea, voice steady but thin, and just like that, the case steps fully into the public arena. Outside, microphones appear as if summoned by the moment. Reporters ask questions that have waited decades for answers. How did this happen? Why now? Was there a failure? The officials respond carefully, emphasizing process, evidence, patience. They avoid assigning blame, but the implication hangs heavy in the air. This case is not just about one person's guilt. It's about the cost of delay, the consequences of what gets overlooked. The family attends a hearing quietly, sitting together, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the front of the room. Seeing the suspect in this setting doesn't bring the closure they imagined. It brings clarity, yes, but also a fresh surge of anger, grief sharpened by proximity. This is the person who lived freely while they counted years. This is the face attached to all those unanswered questions. They don't look away, even when it hurts. As proceedings adjourn, the legal battle takes shape. Motions are filed almost immediately. Defense attorneys challenge evidence handling. Chain of custody, the ethics of reopening old cases with modern technology. They argue contamination, degradation, bias introduced by time. It's a predictable strategy, but a necessary one. The system demands skepticism, even when the truth feels overwhelming. Prosecutors respond with documentation stacked thick as a phone book, every step logged, every retest verified. They lean heavily on the science, on independent confirmations, on the improbability of coincidence. They remind the court that justice delayed is not justice denied, not when evidence still speaks. And in this case, it speaks loudly. Behind the scenes, detectives prepare for testimony, revisiting notes taken by predecessors long retired or deceased. They read handwriting faded by decades, listened to recordings stored on obsolete formats, absorbing the voices of those who started this journey without knowing how it would end. There's a strange intimacy in that, a sense of collaboration across time, as if the past investigators are finally being heard. The suspect defense team works equally relentlessly, reconstructing his life over the years, presenting him as stable, reliable, unremarkable. They gather character witnesses, neighbors, co-workers who insist they never saw signs of violence. The implication is subtle but clear. This doesn't look like a killer, but looks, the prosecution counters, are precisely what allowed him to remain hidden. As weeks pass, the town adjusts to a new reality. The case becomes a fixture in daily conversation, its details dissected over coffee, debated at dinner tables. Some feel vindicated, recalling suspicions they were told to suppress. Others struggle with disbelief, unable to reconcile the person they knew with the accusations now laid bare. Trust fractures quietly in ways that may never fully heal. The family begins therapy together, guided through the strange terrain of reopened trauma. They are told it's normal to feel worse before feeling better. That resolution often hurts before it helps. They learn to name emotions they've lived with silently for years, to acknowledge that justice, even when it arrives, doesn't undo the past. It only changes how the future is carried. In a holding facility miles away, the suspect adjusts to confinement, days blending together, routine stripped of choice. He receives legal updates filtered through counsel, hears about motions and deadlines, but what occupies him most are the long hours alone. Without distraction, memory creeps in uninvited. He replays moments, decisions, the instant everything pivoted. Time, once a shield, now feels like a relentless interrogator. The trial date is set. The announcement sends a ripple through everyone involved. There is a sense of inevitability now, a forward pull that cannot be resisted. For the detectives, it's validation mixed with anxiety. Courtrooms are unforgiving spaces. Stories must be told perfectly, evidence presented flawlessly. There is no room for assumption, no tolerance for error. As preparations intensify, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. This case has already changed something fundamental. It has proven that silence is not permanent, that evidence doesn't expire just because people do. The forgotten piece that once sat unnoticed has forced a reckoning, not just for one man, but for an entire community that learned, too late, that the past is never really past. The trial opens under a sky that hangs low and colorless, the kind of day that feels suspended in time, as if the world itself is holding its breath. Inside the courthouse, security is tighter than usual, metal detectors humming, officers positioned at every entrance. The case has drawn attention far beyond the town's borders now. Cold cases rarely make it this far. When they do, they carry decades of expectation with them. Jury selection moves slowly, deliberately. Each potential juror is questioned not just about bias, but about memory, patience, and the ability to weigh events that happened before smartphones, before digital footprints, before the constant recording of daily life. This case asks people to travel backward, to judge actions in a different era using tools of the present. Not everyone can do that. Those who remain understand the responsibility they're accepting. Opening statements set the tone without drama. The prosecution speaks of silence, of time as an accomplice, of a crime that believed it could outweigh accountability. They describe the forgotten evidence not as a miracle, but as a witness that never stopped existing. The defense counters with doubt, with warnings about the dangers of hindsight, about how easily narratives can be reshaped when memories fade and technology advances. The jury listens, faces unreadable, notebooks open. The first witnesses take the stand. Retired officers, forensic analysts, neighbors who remember fragments of that year. Each voice adds texture, not clarity at first, but weight. The prosecution builds carefully, layering context before accusation. They walk the jury through the original investigation, the missteps, the limits of the time. They don't shy away from acknowledging what went wrong. Instead, they frame it as the reason the truth waited. When the forgotten evidence is introduced, the courtroom shifts. It's a small object, unremarkable at a glance, but its presence commands attention. The forensic expert explains how it was recovered, preserved, retested. The science is detailed, precise, methodical. There is no flourish, only data. Probabilities so narrow they border on certainty. The jurors lean forward. The defense objects, questions methodology, raises concerns about degradation. The expert answers calmly, thoroughly, leaving little room for speculation. The suspect watches all of this with a stillness that feels rehearsed. His hands remain folded, his gaze fixed straight ahead. Only occasionally does his jaw tighten, a flicker of reaction quickly suppressed. He does not look at the family seated behind the prosecution. He does not look at the jury. It's as if acknowledging either might make the story real in a way he spent a lifetime avoiding. As days pass, testimony becomes more personal. Friends of the victim describe a life interrupted, routines that ended abruptly. The family takes a stand, voices steady but eyes glassy, recounting years spent in limbo. They speak of birthdays without answers, of holidays shadowed by absence. Their words are not accusations. They are records, and records once entered cannot be erased. The defense cross-examines aggressively, probing for inconsistencies, emphasizing the unreliability of long-term memory. It's effective in moments, planting small seeds of doubt. But each time, the prosecution responds with evidence that does not rely on recollection, physical proof, measurable facts. The past, it seems, left behind more than anyone realized. Midway through the trial, the suspect takes a stand. The decision surprises many. His testimony is controlled, articulate. He speaks of his life, his work, his shock at being accused so late in life. He denies involvement, suggests coincidence, implies the evidence has been misinterpreted. For a brief moment, his narrative feels plausible. Time has polished his delivery. But cross-examination is unforgiving. The prosecutor moves slowly, deliberately, revisiting timelines, statements, small details the suspect glossed over. They introduce contradictions, not loudly but persistently. A pause here, a correction there. The story begins to wobble. The suspect grows defensive, answers shortening, confidence thinning. The jury notices. When the forgotten evidence is brought back into discussion, the room tightens again. The prosecutor asks a single question, one that ties the suspect irrevocably to that object, to that moment. The answer comes too quickly. Then a realization, a silence. It's brief but devastating. The defense objects, but the damage is done. The truth has found a crack. Closing arguments approach with a sense of inevitability. Both sides know what the evidence suggests, but suggestion is not enough. The jury must be convinced beyond doubt. The prosecution speaks of patience, of justice that waited because it had to, not because it was weak. The defense warns of precedent, of the danger in trusting what cannot be recreated exactly as it was. When deliberations begin, the courtroom empties, leaving behind an echo of everything that's been said. Outside, the family waits. The town waits. The past waits. For the first time in decades, the outcome is no longer hypothetical. It is imminent. And whatever the jury decides, the silence that once protected the truth has already been broken. The jury room is smaller than anyone imagines. Stripped of ceremony, fluorescent lights humming softly above a long table scarred by years of deliberation. This is where stories collide with evidence, where belief is forced to confront fact. 12 strangers sit down carrying decades of someone else's history, each aware that whatever happens next will ripple far beyond these walls. At first, they speak cautiously. They review timelines, testimony, the careful language of expert witnesses. Some focus on the science, tracing probabilities and procedures with methodical precision. Others linger on the human elements, the pauses in testimony, the moments where emotion cracked through composure. No one rushes. This is not a case that allows haste. Doubt surfaces early, as it always does. Questions about contamination, about memory, about whether time itself can distort truth. The defense's arguments echo in the room, doing what they were designed to do: slow the process, force reconsideration. But each doubt is met with a return to the evidence, to what can be measured and verified. The forgotten piece that reopened everything sits at the center of the discussion, silent but dominant. Hours pass. Coffee grows cold. Not pilep. The jurors begin to see the case not as fragments, but as a sequence, a pattern that does not rely on coincidence. They talk through the suspect's testimony, the moments where his certainty faltered, where his words moved faster than his thoughts. Those small inconsistencies, once isolated, now line up with uncomfortable clarity. As deliberations stretch into the evening, the weight of the decision becomes palpable. This verdict will not just judge a man. It will define how society treats time, memory, and accountability. Some jurors voiced concern about sympathy, about the suspect's age, his nearing retirement, the life he built after the crime. Others countered with a simple truth. Years lived freely do not erase years taken from someone else. Eventually, conversation slows. Not because everything has been said, but because consensus is forming. There is no dramatic revelation, no sudden shift, just a gradual alignment, like pieces clicking into place. The evidence does not shout. It endures. And endurance, the jurors realize, is what makes it trustworthy. When they knock the signal, they reach a verdict. The sound seems louder than it should be. The courtroom fills again, tension coiled tight. The family returns to their seats, hands clasped, breathing shallow. The suspect stands, face carefully composed, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the room. No one speaks. Even the air feels restrained. The foreperson rises, voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. The verdict is read. Guilty. The word lands heavy, final, irreversible. For a fraction of a second, nothing happens. Then emotion breaks through. The family exhales, some crying softly, others simply closing their eyes. Years of suspended grief shift into something else. Not relief exactly, but resolution. The suspect's reaction is subtle. A tightening of the jaw. A blink held too long. Whatever denial, he carried fractures quietly. There is no outburst, no collapse. Just the realization that time, which once protected him, has turned into the very thing that delivered him here. The judge thanks the jury, acknowledges the complexity of their task. Sentencing is scheduled, formalities explained. But the core of the matter is already settled. The truth has been spoken by 12 voices acting as one. Outside, the cameras resume, reporters ready to translate this moment into headlines. But inside the courtroom, something more profound has occurred. This is the moment when the past finally releases its grip, not because the pain disappears, but because it has been witnessed, validated, and answered. The cold case is no longer a question mark. It is a statement. And that statement will echo long after the room empties, long after the lights dim, reminding everyone who hears it that time may delay justice, but it does not have the power to erase it. Sentencing day arrives without spectacle. No crowds pressing against barricades, no chants or signs, just a quiet gravity that settles over the courthouse like a held breath. The verdict has already rewritten the story, but this moment decides how it ends. The suspect enters slower now, shoulders slightly rounded, the posture of a man no longer insulated by possibility. The uniform he once wore in his working life, the routines that defined him, are gone. What remains is the consequence. The courtroom listens as the prosecution outlines the weight of the crime once more, not to relitigate guilt, but to frame accountability. They speak of years stolen, of a life frozen at the moment violence intervened. They talk about the long silence, how it shaped the family's grief, how it reshaped the community's sense of safety. Each sentence is measured, restrained, carrying authority without excess. This is not about anger now. It is about record. The defense asked for leniency. They point to age, to declining health, to decades lived without further offense. They argue that punishment should consider the present, not just the past. The words are expected, procedural, but they hang in the air unanswered, because some acts refuse to age. Some moments do not soften with time. When the judge speaks, the room stills completely. The tone is even, deliberate. The court acknowledges the extraordinary delay between crime and conviction, the role of evolving science, the persistence of investigators who refuse to let the case remain buried. The sentence is pronounced, firm and unequivocal. Years. Accountability measured not by how long the suspect evaded justice, but by what was taken. The sound of the gavel is sharp, final. For the family, it lands like a release valve opening. Some weep openly now. Others remain rigid, absorbing the reality that the waiting is over. There is no celebration, no sense of victory. Only a quiet recognition that the truth has been formally acknowledged by the system that once failed them. Outside, the story spreads quickly. Headlines move fast, compressing decades into a few stark lines. A cold case solved. Forgotten evidence. Killer exposed. But those phrases barely scratch the surface. They cannot convey the years of uncertainty, the nights spent replaying unanswered questions, the way absence reshaped everyday life. They cannot show the cost of waiting. Investigators speak briefly to the press, careful with their words. They emphasize process, collaboration, the importance of preserving evidence no matter how insignificant it seems. One comment stands out, delivered without drama. Time does not destroy truth. Negligence does. It becomes a quote repeated across broadcasts, the lesson drawn from the wreckage of the past. In the weeks that follow, the case continues to ripple outward. Other cold files are reopened. Evidence rooms are revisited. Techniques once considered experimental are now standard. Families long resigned to silence begin calling detectives again, asking if their loved ones' cases might still hold answers. Hope, cautious and fragile, starts to move through spaces where it hasn't lived in years. For the family at the center of it all, life does not suddenly normalize. Grief doesn't conclude with a verdict, but something fundamental shifts. The narrative that haunted them for decades finally has an ending. They can speak about the past without stumbling into unanswered questions. The story, while tragic, is no longer incomplete. The town remembers, not just the crime, but the lesson it delivered, that justice is not always swift, that it can be delayed by error, by oversight, by the limitations of its time, but also that persistence matters, that evidence waits, that silence can be broken, even decades later, by a single overlooked detail, refusing to stay forgotten. As the courthouse empties and the lights dim once more, the case settles into history, not as a mystery, but as a warning that somewhere in some box, in some room filled with dust and files, the truth may still be waiting. And when it finally surfaces, it will do what it always does. It will change everything. Time moves differently after a case like this closes. Not faster, not slower, just heavier. The calendar pages still turn, the seasons still change, but every date now carries a before and an after. Before the truth surfaced, after it refused to stay buried. In the town where it happened, people speak about it in lowered voices, not because it's secret, but because it feels personal, like a shared scar that finally stopped bleeding. The house where the crime began still stands. New paint, new owners, different curtains in the windows. But the walls remember. Neighbors remember too. They remember the night the sirens cut through the dark, the way doors opened and lights flicked on one by one. Curiosity mixing with fear. Back then, no one imagined the silence would last decades. No one imagined the answers would come from a box marked forgotten. Investigators returned to their routines, but something has changed in the way they work. Evidence rooms are no longer storage spaces. They are time capsules. Gloves linger longer on fingertips. Labels are double-checked. What once seemed insignificant now carries weight. A smudge, a partial print, a sample too small to matter back then. The lesson is carved deep now. The smallest detail can outlive every lie told around it. The detective who reopened the file doesn't seek attention. He avoids interviews when he can. When asked why he didn't let it go, his answer is simple. Because the case never felt finished. Because unfinished things have a way of calling back. Late at night, in quiet moments, in the space between what's written and what's true. For the family, memory rearranges itself. Old photographs are taken out again. Stories once too painful to tell are spoken aloud. There is laughter mixed with tears now, something impossible before. The victim is no longer defined only by how they died, but by how they lived. The cold case label falls away, replaced by a name, a face, a history reclaimed from the shadows. The convicted man begins his sentence in a place stripped of identity. A number, a schedule, concrete and steel. The routines are rigid, unyielding. Time, which once shielded him, now stretches endlessly ahead. There are no more strategies, no more arguments, no more appeals to uncertainty. Just the echo of a choice made long ago, finally answered. Across the state, law enforcement agencies quietly update protocols. Training sessions reference the case without naming it, focusing on the principle rather than the headline. Preserve everything. Assume nothing. Trust that the future may know more than the present. It's not dramatic. It's methodical. And it's how change actually happens. The media cycle moves on. As it always does, new stories replace old ones. But this case lingers in a different way. It becomes a reference point, a reminder brought up in classrooms, in briefings, in conversations between detectives who have seen too many unanswered questions. It stands as proof that closure is not a myth, just a delayed outcome. At night, when the town quiets and streets empty, the story still hums beneath the surface. Not loudly, not urgently, just enough to be felt. A reminder that truth has patience, that it can wait through decades of neglect, through changes in technology, through generations of doubt. And when it finally emerges, it doesn't ask permission. It simply arrives, undeniable, reshaping everything around it. This is what remains after the verdict, after the sentence, after the headlines fade. A community altered, a family grounded, a system reminded of its responsibility, and a single, stubborn fact standing at the center of it all, unmovable and clear. Some truths do not expire. They endure, and when they're finally heard, they leave silence in their wake. The kind that only comes when a question has, at last, been answered. Long after the courthouse empties and the microphones are packed away, the case keeps breathing in smaller rooms, quieter spaces where no cameras are allowed. It breathes in the evidence locker that was finally cleared, shelves once crowded now marked with blank tags and final dates. It breathes in the notebooks of detectives who wrote margins full of questions that went unanswered for years, now rereading their own handwriting with a strange sense of relief and regret tangled together. It breathes in the silence that settles when a mystery is no longer a mystery, when the weight of not knowing is replaced by the heavier burden of knowing exactly what happened. The retired officers who worked the original investigation hear the news in fragments. A phone call, a headline glimpsed online, a former partner knocking on a door they haven't opened to police work in years. Some sit down when they hear it. Some shake their heads slowly. Some feel vindicated. Others feel the sharp sting of mischances. No one feels untouched. The past doesn't ask permission before stepping back into the present. One detective pulls an old box from his garage, dust thick on the lid, the smell of cardboard and time trapped inside. Inside are copies of reports, photos that should have stayed buried, notes written in the urgency of youth. He flips through them slowly, seeing what he couldn't see then. The angle of the photograph, the phrasing of a statement, the evidence that waited quietly for technology to catch up. He closes the box again, not because he's finished, but because some chapters don't need rereading once the ending is known. For the family, the world divides itself into strange categories. There are people who remember, people who pretend to remember, people who only know the case from headlines and podcasts. They learn to navigate conversations carefully, answering questions that come from curiosity rather than care. Choosing silence when words feel too exposed. Grief doesn't disappear with answers. It just changes shape. It becomes less sharp, more expansive, woven into daily life instead of crashing through it. Anniversaries take on new meaning. Dates once marked only by loss are now marked by truth. Candles are lit with steadier hands. Names are spoken without hesitation. The victim is remembered not as a question mark, but as a full stop, a life with edges no longer blurred by speculation. The family doesn't celebrate justice. They acknowledge it, quietly, privately, with the understanding that nothing truly restores what was taken. Inside law enforcement circles, the case is dissected without drama, not for entertainment, for instruction. Training rooms grow quiet as instructors point to specific moments where decisions could have gone differently, where assumptions hardened too quickly, where evidence was underestimated. There is no blame assigned, only responsibility recognized. The message is clear and relentless. Time does not erase mistakes, but it can expose them. The convicted man's name slowly fades from conversation, replaced by broader implications. Systems, processes, preservation, accountability. His story narrows as it enters the confines of prison routine, while the story of the case expands outward, touching departments, policies, and future investigations. Infamy is fleeting. Impact is not. In the town itself, life moves forward in ordinary ways. Kids ride bikes past the house that once made headlines. New families move in, unaware of the ground beneath them. But every so often, someone pauses a little longer on the sidewalk, remembering the night when everything changed, the years when nothing did, and the moment when the past finally knocked loudly enough to be heard. The case no longer demands attention. It commands respect, not because of its brutality, but because of its persistence, because it proves that even when files are closed, truth remains active, patient, waiting for the right alignment of memory, technology, and human refusal to give up. And in the quiet spaces between official statements and personal reflection, a single understanding settles in, heavy and unavoidable. This wasn't just a case that was solved. It was a reminder that time can hide the truth, but it cannot protect lies forever. That evidence does not forget, and that even after decades of silence, the past can still speak with absolute clarity, if someone is willing to listen. The realization doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in slowly, through routine moments that now feel altered, like the air itself has shifted. Detectives who spent their careers chasing answers wake up one morning, without the familiar weight of this case pressing on their chests. It's gone, not forgotten, not dismissed, but finished. And the absence feels almost unsettling. For years, the unsolved questions have been a constant companion, a low hum beneath every new investigation, every late night, every conversation about cold cases that might never thaw. Now that hum has gone quiet. Inside the department, younger officers listen as veterans recount the story not with pride, but with caution. They describe the long nights, the false leads, the moments when confidence replaced curiosity, when certainty arrived too early and shut doors that should have stayed open. The lesson isn't delivered as a warning shouted across a room. It's spoken calmly, deliberately, the way you explain something that costs too much to learn any other way. Evidence is patient, they say. People are not, and that difference matters. The technology that cracked the case becomes almost mythical in retelling, but those closest to the truth know it wasn't magic. It was discipline, preservation, a refusal to throw anything away just because it didn't fit the story at the time. The forgotten evidence didn't solve the case on its own. It waited. It endured neglect, skepticism, decades of darkness, until the right moment arrived. And when it did, it spoke without hesitation. In the courtroom, the echoes linger long after the verdict. The sound of the judge's voice. The subtle shift when the words finally landed. Guilty. A single word, carrying the weight of years. No cheers. No gasps. Just a collective exhale that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Some people cried. Others stared straight ahead. Justice, when it comes late, doesn't arrive with celebration. It arrives with gravity. The victim's name is spoken again, not as a mystery, not as a headline, but as a person. Friends from decades ago come forward with stories that were once too painful to share. Laughter, habits, small details that remind everyone this life was larger than the crime that ended it. These memories don't soften the loss. They sharpen it. But they also restore something that time tried to erase. The convicted man fades into background, his identity reduced to a case number, his future defined by routines behind concrete walls. The spotlight moves away from him quickly, almost intentionally. This story was never meant to be about his notoriety. It was about accountability, about the slow, grinding work of truth pushing its way to the surface no matter how deeply buried it was. In the archives, the case file is finally marked complete. A clerk updates the system, a small administrative action that carries enormous symbolic weight. One less open wound, one less unanswered question. The file doesn't disappear. It's relocated, reclassified, preserved as both record and reminder, proof that closure is possible, but never guaranteed. For the community, the resolution settles unevenly. Some feel relief. Others feel anger that it took so long. A few feel both at once. Conversations shift from speculation to reflection, from what if to what now. The case becomes part of local history, something referenced quietly, thoughtfully, with an understanding that it shaped the town in ways that statistics never could. And beneath it all, a deeper truth lingers, uncomfortable and undeniable. This case was not unique. It was one of many, separated only by the luck of preserved evidence and a moment when someone chose to look again. The silence that follows isn't peace. It's vigilance, a reminder that justice is not automatic. It must be pursued, protected, and sometimes dragged out of the shadows by sheer persistence. As the story continues to ripple outward, one final thought refuses to fade. The past is never truly past. It waits, it listens, and when the right hands finally reach into the darkness, it answers without mercy, without delay, with everything it has been holding back. What follows is quieter, almost deceptively so, as if the world expects a solved case to neatly fold itself away. But resolution does not erase momentum. It redirects it. The energy that once drove the search now fuels something else entirely, a restless examination of how close this case came to never being reopened at all. In meeting rooms and closed offices, people ask questions that feel heavier than the ones asked during the investigation itself. What if the evidence had been discarded? What if the funding had dried up 1 year earlier? What if the person who noticed the anomaly had shrugged and moved on? The answers to those questions never arrive, but their shadows linger, forcing uncomfortable honesty. The detectives who carried the case into its final chapter feel a strange responsibility settle on their shoulders. They are congratulated, thanked, praised for persistence, but beneath the acknowledgments lies a sharper awareness. Success here does not cancel out the years of failure that preceded it. They don't talk about victory. They talk about obligation, about the countless other files sitting in similar boxes, each one waiting for someone to notice what was missed, to hear what went unheard. Solving this case didn't close a door. It opened hundreds more. The victim's family begins a slow, uneven process of redefining their relationship with the past. For decades, grief was suspended in uncertainty, a wound that refused to scar over because it never fully closed. Now the wound has edges. Painful edges, but real ones. They begin sorting through old belongings not as relics of mystery, but as pieces of a life that existed independently of the crime. Photographs are framed again. Stories are told without lowering voices. The name no longer trembles when spoken. There is sorrow, yes, but also something steadier, something grounded, outside their private circle. The public appetite for detail flares briefly and then fades. True crime cycles move fast. New cases replace old ones. Headlines shift. Attention migrates. But for those directly touched by this story, the resolution doesn't end the narrative. It transforms it. The case is no longer about what happened in that moment of violence. It's about what happened afterward, about waiting, about endurance, about the long cost of unanswered questions. Within law enforcement, the case becomes a benchmark, referenced not as a miracle, but as a warning. Training materials are updated, protocols adjusted, evidence handling procedures tightened. The forgotten evidence that finally exposed the truth is no longer an anomaly. It becomes a symbol, a reminder etched into policy. Nothing is insignificant until proven so by time and scrutiny, not assumption. The town itself absorbs the outcome in subtle ways. There is no parade, no memorial suddenly erected in the town square. Instead, there are conversations in grocery store aisles, pauses at stoplights near familiar intersections, moments when someone realizes they've carried a fragment of the story with them for years without knowing how it would end. The resolution settles like dust after a long collapse, slowly, unevenly, coating everything. At night, when the streets are empty and the world feels temporarily suspended, the echoes of the case still surface, in hum of fluorescent lights in police stations, in the creak of old houses where families once waited for news that never came, in the quiet determination of investigators who now look at cold cases differently, no longer as relics of the past, but as conversations interrupted, waiting to be resumed. There is no single moment when closure fully arrives. It approaches in fragments, in breaths that come easier than they used to, in the absence of dread on certain calendar dates, in the quiet knowledge that the truth, however delayed, did not disappear. It waited, patient, relentless, and as the case slowly recedes from public view, it leaves behind a final, unshakable imprint, a lesson written not in headlines, but in consequence, that justice has a long memory, that silence is never proof of absence, and that even after decades of darkness, one overlooked detail can still tear through time, demanding to be seen, demanding to be answered, demanding, finally, to be believed. By the time the case reaches this stage, it no longer feels like an investigation. It feels like an aftermath, a long, echoing corridor where every step forward reveals something left behind. People begin to notice how deeply the case had threaded itself into their lives, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, persistently, like background noise you only recognize once it stops. The absence is strange, almost uncomfortable. For years, the unanswered questions gave shape to the fear, the rumors, the half-believed theories. Now there is certainty, and certainty has its own weight. The retired officers who once worked the original scene revisit in memory, replaying details with a clarity that borders on obsession. They remember the smell of the air, the way the light fell across the floor, the pressure to move quickly, to conclude, to restore order. Some of them admit, in private, that they see it differently now, not with guilt alone, but with understanding. The past was built on limitations, technology, time, human bias. That understanding doesn't erase regret, but it sharpens resolve. They speak to younger detectives not as mentors, but as witnesses to how easily certainty can betray truth. In quiet households across the region, people who never knew the victim personally feel something settle inside them. This case had lived in the background of their lives as a warning, a cautionary tale parents reference when locking doors at night or telling their children to come home early. Now that it's solved, it loses none of its power. If anything, it grows heavier, because the danger was never abstract. It had a face, a history, a presence that moved unnoticed for years. The evidence itself, now fully processed and cataloged, sits in storage again, but its role has changed. It is no longer dormant. It is studied, examined, taught. A fragment once dismissed now serves as proof that truth does not require attention to exist. It only requires preservation. The technicians who handled it speak about it with reverence, not because it was extraordinary, but because it survived, against neglect, against time, against assumptions that nearly erased it. For the family, this phase is the hardest to explain. The urgency is gone. The phone calls slow. The court dates end. And suddenly, they are alone with a truth they fought decades to uncover. There is relief, yes, but also a hollow space where the search once lived. They begin to understand that answers do not replace loss. They simply give it shape. The grief remains, but it is no longer suspended in doubt. It has gravity now, and gravity, while heavy, is stable. Community leaders attempt to frame the resolution as healing, but healing implies an end point, and this does not feel like an ending. It feels like a reckoning, a collective acknowledgement that time did not make the crime smaller. It only made the wait longer. Public forums, once filled with speculation, shift toward reflection. People listen more than they speak. The story is no longer something to solve. It is something to absorb. Late at night, when the world feels still enough to hear old echoes, the case whispers its final lesson. Not that justice always comes. Not that technology will save us. But that truth is resilient. That it can survive indifference. That it can wait inside forgotten boxes and mislabeled envelopes, patient enough to outlast careers, systems, even lives. And as the town moves forward, carrying this knowledge quietly, one thing becomes unmistakably clear. The case may be closed, but its presence remains woven into how people think, how they remember, how they refuse. Now more than ever, to look away when something feels unresolved. The final chapter doesn't arrive with a dramatic sound. There is no slam of a door, no swelling music, no moment where everything suddenly feels complete. Instead, it settles in the way dusk settles over a town that has seen too much daylight. Slowly, inevitably, with a quiet acceptance that something has changed forever. The case is over, but its shadow remains, stretched long across memory, across routine, across the way people now look at the past and understand it is never truly finished with us. Years from now, new detectives will come across this file not because it is open, but because it is important. They will read it in training rooms, late at night, flipping pages that smell faintly of paper and time. They will see how confidence once masqueraded as certainty, how silence was mistaken for absence, how one overlooked detail carried the truth all along. And some of them will feel a chill, not from fear, but from recognition, because they will realize how easily this could have been any other case, any other victim, any other forgotten box on a shelf. The family continues forward in small, deliberate steps. There is no blueprint for life after answers arrive too late. Some days feel lighter, almost peaceful. Other days feel heavier than ever. But the question that haunted them for decades is gone, replaced by something quieter, something final. The truth does not give back what was taken, but it restores something that mattered just as much. The dignity of knowing, the right to stop asking why. In the town, life resumes its ordinary rhythm. Children grow up without realizing how close they live to a story that once defined everything. New buildings rise. Old ones disappear. Streets are repaved. And yet, in certain corners, the past feels close enough to touch. A particular stretch of road. A building that still hasn't been renovated. A name that lingers in conversation longer than it needs to. The case has become part of the landscape, invisible but permanent. Law enforcement moves on to the next unsolved file, because there's always a next one. But something subtle has shifted. A hesitation before discarding evidence. A longer pause when a detail doesn't fit. A renewed respect for the quiet persistence of facts. This case changed how people listen to the past. It taught them that answers don't announce themselves. They wait to be earned. And somewhere between the records and the memories, between what was lost and what was finally found, the story reaches its true ending. Not with closure, but with clarity. The truth came. It endured. It refused to disappear. And when it finally surfaced, it did not shout. It simply stood there, undeniable, asking only to be acknowledged. The case is solved. The killer exposed. The evidence no longer forgotten. But the echo remains, carrying a final, unyielding message into the silence that follows. Nothing buried stays silent forever, and no matter how long it takes, the truth remembers exactly where it was left.